Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for Thursday, April 1st. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics.
And I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief.
Happy April Fool's Day, Carl.
Hey, pal, I wrote in my morning note that it was a sunny, beautiful and sunny day while it was raining and gray because I wanted to alert my readers that I was going to do some April Fool's stuff. But then the sun came out, so it didn't make a liar out of me. It made a truth teller out of me while I was trying to lie. So
but it's also...
It's opening day, Tom.
It's one of your favorite days. It's opening day, Carl.
Yeah, that's right.
And apparently we're gonna have fans back in the stands.
Well, in Nats Park, they're going to have, it's supposed to have 5,000 fans until hopefully it'll get more as the spring and summer goes on. Max Scherzer is pitching tonight for the home team 9. So people here are excited. It gives us something, this is the only thing in Washington anymore that people are united about. They're not completely united, but is sports. So I'm glad baseball's here.
The season hasn't even started and already there's controversy. Joe Biden was on ESPN yesterday agreeing and saying that he fully supported the push to boycott the Major League All Star Game, which is going to be held in Atlanta, to have that moved out of this state over this new voting law that was passed in Georgia. What do you make of that, Carl? And have we ever seen a president of the United States encourage the boycott of one of its states over a political issue?
Well, it's a state he just carried, too. You'd think he might want to rethink that. I noticed Coca-Cola executives and Delta Airlines executives are saying, vague statements, repeating Democratic Party talking points. Oh, this law is not who we are. But what's the provision in it that they don't like? Nobody's looked at this law who's criticizing it. What Joe Biden said about it is simply wrong. It doesn't restrict early voting, it expands early voting. The Washington Post did a story about this. The fact checker, Glenn Kessler, who's very good, he gave Biden 4 Pinocchios on the things he said about the Georgia law. So this is getting out of hand. And why stop there then? How about states that, are trying to be more restrictive on abortion or, work to right to work states? Where does this end? This is a mistake by Biden. And it's very nearly the opposite of the way he said he'd govern.
But it seems like it's, as you mentioned, the CEO of Delta, Coca-Cola, they have come out against this law saying it's quote unquote unacceptable. The governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, was on Fox News arguing, and he wrote a piece for Fox News, which we are carrying on the site this morning, saying, look, there's so much misinformation and lies about this piece. Here are the facts, and he goes through it, saying that Georgia, in fact, trying to rebut some of these arguments that actually early voting was expanded and there were more opportunities for people to vote. The main provision, which seems to be getting the most blowback, Carl, is this idea that you can't give food or water to anybody who's standing in line, and that this is somehow cruel, and this is a throwback to Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Kemp has pointed out, as have others, that this is to protect voters from electioneering, right? From being harassed while they're standing in line or being given gifts of a certain value. Eric Erickson said at some point a couple of years ago, folks were handing out, iTunes gift cards to try and influence votes and things of that nature. And so the provision is to protect that. But as Kemp said, look, it's 100 or 250 foot buffer around the polling places. Beyond that, you can still do electioneering. Certainly, poll workers can provide water to people who are standing in line, and obviously you could bring your own water. So why has this gotten so out of hand in terms of the misinformation about what's in this bill, Carl?
Well, it was a deliberate effort at deception by people who say that they hate misinformation and disinformation. But Tom, the water thing became a symbol, and it's a symbol for something that actually is important. People should not have to wait 5 hours to vote in this country in line anywhere, period. And any supposed voter reform law that hopes to reduce fraud needs to take that into account. And what I in this sense that law looks goofy to people who are just casually aware. What do you mean you can't give them water? Well, it's, as you point out, it's partisan political operatives can't give them food and water. But why should you have to wait in line? And those long lines remind people of what they've seen in the last several elections. They seem to be in the big cities. They seem to be where there's heavy African American turnout or heavy Democratic vote. And to me, it's incumbent on Republicans in Georgia and other states, if they're going to do election reform, to say, oh, by the way, one thing is you shouldn't have to wait in line. We'll have enough voting places. We'll have enough drop-off boxes. We'll have enough volunteers so people can vote. In 5 or 10 minutes. It shouldn't take more than that.
It shouldn't, but again, part of this is right. The local election officials are the ones who run those elections, and so it's complicated, right? It's not as easy as just sort of, a mandate that we're going to have X number of voting machines, and I mean, in a perfect world, that'd be great, and that's what we want. We want people, and you and I have advocated for turning Election Day into a national holiday, so people can, if they have to wait in line, even if it's for a bit of time, but they're not missing work, and it's as accessible as it can possibly be for everyone. That's what we want, and we also want the vote to be. People have to have confidence in the integrity of the system.
Well, that's right. But I guess what I'm saying is that the Republican view is that Democrats are trying to screw with the system and tweak the system and game the system so that it makes it easier for people to vote who shouldn't be able to vote. There have been no studies that show major voting fraud on the kind of scale that implies. And what Republicans and Democrats ought to do, and I've said this before, I've written it, is get together and negotiate these things. You shouldn't have a thing where one party is ramming through election reform over another party. The Democrats will do it in their states. Republicans do it in states where they have the legislatures and the governors. That's ridiculous. This is something we all agree on. How do you expand the voter pool? This is, by the way, what the law after the 2000 presidential election, federal law was supposed to do, and most people were happy with it. Maybe it's time for a reboot. How do you make it easy for everybody in the country to vote and eliminate fraud? That's not like the most impossible thing I've ever heard of. The country that put a man on the moon can figure out how to do it, but only if the two parties want to work together and actually make it happen, not if they just want partisan advantage and partisan posture.
And it's hard if the leader of the country is engaged in playing partisan politics with this issue too. I mean, if Joe Biden's out there calling it Jim Crow and an abomination, it's going to make it hard for that compromise to happen. All right, Carl, last question before we go. So will the All Star Game be played in Atlanta this year or not?
Well, my guess is that Georgia's governor and legislatures will amend the law in some way that doesn't, change it in a huge way, but symbolically change it in a way that shows people that this was not an attempt to restrict voting. That's my guess, and that these corporate heads who are just repeating crap they heard on television will stand down and the game will be played in Atlanta. That'd be my guess, but you never know these days.
I'll do my best, John McLaughlin. Wrong, Carl. The game will not be played in Atlanta this year. All right, we will leave it there. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics.
And I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief for RCP. This has been the Real Clear Politics Takeaway for April Fool's Day, 2021.